Welcome, everyone. If you are joining us today, then it is my pleasure to introduce you to a brand new podcast. It dives headfirst into fantasy football. Unlike most other podcasts where they rely on expensive studio crews, insider relationships, and breaking news to hold your attention, we decided to go in a different route. It's just three friends discussing football, the way you and your friends do, just sitting around the living room, debating the drama, the hype surrounding a big week, or parsing the stages of grief after a rough showing. Fantasy has become extremely popular over the last decade and continues to grow. As a consequence, the market has become oversaturated with content. Every website now has a million rankers with all the hot takes on how to win your league or breakout star to throw all your fab at. If you, like us, are looking for a platform for discussion that's free from distraction, then you found the place. Maybe you're the guy who buys a fantasy magazine from the gas station on the way to the draft, the lady who dominates her office league 3 years running, or maybe this is your first year and you don't even know what fab means. No matter where you fall on the spectrum, you'll find something to enjoy with us. We are Game Time Indecision, the fantasy podcast that you turn to when you've tried everything else and you're still indecisive. My name is Rob. I've been playing fantasy football since 2006, so that's roughly 15 years. I'm a Vikings fan since back in the day when watching Moss and Carter in the 90s, which that offense was super lethal, if you guys remember. And that's kind of how I fell in love with the game. My first league was a 14-teamer with some friends back in high school. It changed some hands over the year, but we still play in that league today. And since then, my love has grown exponentially. And to the point, it was even out of control, where I was even managing 7 leagues at once. I've since scaled it back a little bit, and now I'm only in 3 leagues, which are all with close friend groups. And that's part of fantasy, that's my favorite part. It gives you the chance to sort of cosplay as owners with a group of friends just to talk ball. And that's why I love, the small league that we're all in together, despite me winning, 3 out of the last 4 titles?
4 out of the last 5.
Oh, 4 out of the last 5. Excuse me. Thanks for the correction. I really do enjoy that the discourse that we have in the group chat, It's that talk between friends that became the fabric of this podcast, all because of fantasy. And by that, I'll have you guys introduce yourselves.
Cool.
Cam, why don't you go ahead and start?
All right, so I've been playing a little less long, about 9 or 10 years now. And I started in your guys' league that we're all still in. My love for football started with the Pride of West Virginia, the Mountaineers. My love for pro football started with Dan Marino and Don Shula. But my mother's side of the family is from Pittsburgh, so I'm a big Steelers fan too. Steelers, Dolphins, split my allegiance 50-50. When it comes to fantasy, I just try to add another element each year to what I'm researching, what my knowledge base is. I just try to get a little bit better each year, and can't take down Rob yet, but make the playoffs pretty much every single year and make the championship 2 out of the last 4. So, and I'm kind of like you said, you've learned to rein it in. You went to too many leagues, then reined it back in. Since I'm a little less experienced than you, I'm in that part now where I'm in too many leagues. I think I was in 6 last year. Did make the championship in 3 though, so pretty successful year all in all. But I'm just happy to chop it up with you guys and be playing another year.
Nice. Yeah, same. So my name is Abhishek. I've been playing fantasy football since 2006, just like Rob. I've been watching professional football since 1999. And as a Seahawks fan, that was way back. That was before Matt Hasselbeck. I was the John Kitna days. So I've been watching NFL football for a while. My biases include the Seahawks as well as anything Ohio State related. So yeah, and pretty much any and every offensive player from Ohio State, I'm going to be really high on coming into the league. So aware of those biases. So like I said, I've been playing since 2006. I remember my first league was a 10-team league. And I actually remember my very first pick. It was LaDainian Tomlinson, the year that he went off for like 31 touchdowns, which I think is still an NFL record for a running back. So
It's kind of funny though. Ohio State bias is a lot different than the West Virginia bias. I am automatically skeptical of a player if they came out of West Virginia because we send straight flops to the NFL. Kevin White being a great example of that.
but Gino
Yeah,
though,
hey, we got that
Right.
redemption.
The golden
Yeah,
goose.
yeah, redemption story.
yeah. Hey, that could be somebody I'm going to discuss later this year.
Ooh, a little
Maybe.
foreshadowing. I like it. I like it. All right. Well, with that being said, since we're all a little bit more familiar with each other, and hopefully everyone out there is a little more familiar with us as well, let's dive on into free agency. It's that wonderful time of year when hope springs eternal for every team, whether you are 4-13 or 16-1. This is that season of change. The one constant of football is that the winds of change are always blowing, rising some to soar new heights, while others, who have not adapted, are left behind. These trends tend to follow patterns depending on position, and they're really the key to exploiting these trends to fill your team's needs. Running backs are an interesting example of this. The NFL has always depressed their value as they enter the league. And moreover, we are seeing that the same trend continues with the way that a team evaluates a player come to contract time. What's changed most is how we as fantasy managers now value the position. Gone are the days where running backs are the first 10 picks of your draft. We're seeing a rising in zero running back strategies as well. Unfortunately, the truth isn't so simple, and where you find the best value at the position can be found somewhere between those strategies. Austin Eckler last year finished second in fantasy points at the position and is seeking a new deal from the Chargers. This year, if he remains on the team, he is set to be the clear choice, in my opinion, at 1.1 overall. But outside of Austin Eckler, or the Barkleys, or the Taylors, there's a tremendous drop-off in a superstar-type production. At this point, you need to decide, do I invest in a new environment or run it back with a guy I trust? More than not, top guys fail to repeat and cannot return draft value. Personally, I'd rather take a shot on a guy like Austin Eckler at the top of my draft than to try to find first-round value in a third or fourth-round running back. It all comes down to how you build your team and who you evaluate to be on or under the radar compared to consensus. And this is where you find the value to become a champion. And with that being said, who's a player that's flying on your radar heading into this season, Cam?
Yeah, I liked what you said about Eckler too. I'd be in on him over somebody a little bit later, as long as we don't see the draft happen, what some mocks are having happen, which is Bijan going to LA. So that could be a huge wrinkle. But the player I'm really excited about the move, not necessarily super excited, but I have a lot of interest in it and what's going to unfold over the next couple months is Rashaad Penny. So the good is where he's moving to, Philadelphia. It's a great system. It's a great offense. It's a great offensive line. It's a great scheme for running. You got Hurts that the defense has to worry about. Last year, being the number one guy there, Miles Sanders went for 5 yards a carry, fifth in the league in rushing yards. And despite having Hurts as a possible vulture, he was still seventh in touchdowns. So it's somewhere where if you are the lead back, you can really produce and have a great fantasy season. The other good is I don't think any analysts would ever try to say that Rashaad Penny doesn't have a lot of talent. I don't think any Seattle fans, Abhishek, you can correct me if I'm wrong, would say that Penny doesn't have a lot of talent when he's healthy. So, yeah, I mean, he's a big slasher, 220 pounds, has the weight to be a three down back. He's fast. He can hit home runs. He, in that tear in 2021 where he became everybody's darling, he was at 6.3 yards a carry. This last year before he got hurt, he was at 6.1 yards per carry. Throughout his career, he's been over 4 yards after contact. He's a really efficient runner when he's healthy. The downsides are there are injury issues with him. I think that's part of why Philadelphia only invested what they did. That's the other problem that I have right now is looking at what they invested. They only put, I think, 1.5 million in him. That tells me that Philly still might be putting some high draft capital into a running back. If they don't take a running back high in the draft, I'm going to be looking to see him move up in ADP. His ECR right now is 34. And it's one of those things that we have to wait and see what happens with the draft, what happens over the next couple months. If that running back room stays the same with Boston Scott, Kenneth Gainwell, they're not going to take a whole lot of burn. So we just got to see what happens. If they draft a running back pretty high, I'm going to have him dropping a lot. If they don't, I'm going to have him raising as the season gets closer. On the other end of the spectrum, with him leaving Seattle, I think that opens up. They also had Homer leave, so all they have is Dallas there with Kenneth Walker. I think Kenneth Walker is going to be hugely spotlighted. To me, a low end running back one, but to somebody else in this chat here, maybe even a little bit higher. What do you think, Abhishek, about Rashaad Penny leaving and about Walker remaining, being a Seattle guy?
Yeah, Cam, that was a good overview. You were absolutely right. So as a Seahawk fan, I've been watching his career ever since he joined, right? So we spent a first round pick on him way back in the day, and honestly, overall, I think almost Seahawks fans agree he was a bust because you don't spend a first round pick on someone with that little production. However, whenever you watch him play, you're right, he looks like a superstar running back. He looks like Saquon Barkley. He has the size, the speed, all of it. And the book is out on him, right? It's the injury concern. 6 games at most he can play a year. That being said, like you said, like Miles Sanders leaving to Carolina, there's a huge gap now, right? What do you have, like 1,300 yards or something like that last year? So there's a ton of opportunity there. The problem is the book is out on him, and the fact that he's coming off a torn, I think it was a fibula, coming off a broken leg, basically, as well as an ACL 2 years ago. There's huge injury concern there. And like you said, the draft capital, I actually think that because Philly has 2 first-round draft picks this year, the one from the Chris Olave trade last year, I wouldn't be surprised if they spent even that 10th overall pick on Bijan, right? Which would make Rashaad Penny and this whole point kind of moot. But if that doesn't happen, absolutely. I can see he's clearly like the most talented running back in that room. So if he is healthy, I think it's worth keeping an eye on him. On the other end, yeah, dude, Kenneth Walker, like you said, low end RB1 for me, like this has vaulted him to high end RB1 because of that contract. The fact that Seattle had a chance to match or exceed that contract, like you said, it's a very small contract, 1 year, 1.5 million, prove it year. Seattle could have easily matched that with given how little they're paying most players on their team right now. The fact that they didn't, I think, shows that how much they trust Kenneth Walker, because we're talking about a dude who obviously shows superstar talent last year. And like, for me, he has the least number of question marks. With Eckler, Rob, you talked about the situation with the contract. Christian McCaffrey has Elijah Mitchell behind him. Everybody, Derrick Henry has question marks. Everybody's got a question mark. So at the running back position, with Kenneth Walker, the reason why I feel so good about him is 1, he's young, 2, he's healthy, 3, he's in the perfect situation. Pete Carroll wants to run the ball, right? He's one of the very few coaches, very few who would prefer a 60-40 split in terms of run to pass, whereas most coaches want a 60-40 the other way, right? Most want to be more pass heavy. And so that gives him a ton of potential here. The only thing I'm concerned about is that he takes too much wear and tear. That has been a problem with Seattle running backs in the past. People like Marshawn Lynch can last, but with like skinnier running backs, it's a little bit more challenging. And the last point I'll make on this too, the reason why I'm so high on Kenneth Walker this year is Pete Carroll really hasn't had anybody like Kenneth Walker in his on his team, I would say, since Reggie Bush. And by that, I mean, like, he hasn't had a running back who can run through the tackles, but also has that breakaway speed, like that 22 mile per hour breakaway speed. Marshawn Lynch was amazing, but for him, it was more about like, get off me, right? And just like run through 8 people to get 80 yards. For Kenneth Walker, he can run past the guys for an 80-yard run. So that's what I think gets me so excited about K9, they call him. And he, for me, would be a top tier running back. I think I would draft him right after Eckler.
Wow.
Okay.
Well,
okay. So I guess, yeah, then out of all those 3 that we talked about, who you would feel the least confident in Penny then?
Would you in Philly?
the situations where you feel like they're going to bring in another guy. Because I guess that's what you really have to worry about here with the draft, is that with the running back position specifically, competition will kill you. You know, like your volume can flatline, especially if you bring somebody in as talented as
And you
Bijan
said,
Robinson. So I guess when I had asked, I guess that's more the, the revolving factor. It's like, where is that safe spot where you can feel like Walker's going to be the thing? And now we know before drafts, we'll know where Bijan gets drafted and all that stuff. But it is a really interesting topic to discuss, like competition wise. Like some of these guys could get traded in the draft. Mixon could get cut, get brought in. There's a bunch of stuff that we could still have along the running back landscape.
Yeah, I think it was a good point, Abhishek, that there's not question marks like you just brought up. There's more question marks this year than ever. Will Eckler be on his team? Will Kamara be on the same team? Will Cook? There's so many question marks.
Is Jonathan Taylor healthy? Right?
Yeah, but
Yeah,
the
that's a
thing
big
that
one.
I would say to play devil's advocate to you, for him being like the 102 at running back in that top number one tier, is that's harder and harder to do today in the NFL without doing any pass catching from the backfield. And that is a question mark that we have on.
That is true. You're absolutely right. So K9, he wasn't super active, but like the things I saw, like especially when the Seahawks were down a bunch, like the game against the Buccaneers in Germany, he had some really nice catches out of the backfield. Towards the end of the year, he started catching a little more. And another key thing too, the Seattle's key pass catching back from last several years, Travis Homer, is now in Chicago. And so now the only person behind K9 is DJ Dallas. And so there's just not a lot. And again, I think that Seattle will draft a late round running back because the class is so deep. But there's just going to be more opportunities. I totally agree with you, Cam. But I think those opportunities will come, and he's shown the ability to do it.
I like your optimism, but I think even beyond just last year, he didn't catch the ball much in college either. Especially.
Yeah, but who? I mean, neither does Jonathan Taylor, and neither does also obviously Eckler does. But
yeah, I'd like your optimism. I'm just still a little that is for me, and with a guy that doesn't have question marks, that's the question mark.
Well, and that's the thing too, right, Cam? So like, is volume really that necessary for a player like him? Where like he's getting such volume on the ground, does he really need it through the air, or does that 3 to 4 catches a game, but he busts one for like a 60, 70-yard run? Like when you have that kind of a talent, it's almost like I'm not as worried. But then again, 102, like second overall is rich for me, but top 5, I feel like
that's just my argument for second. Is if you really want to be like top tier, number 1, 2, or 3. You're probably going to have to catch the ball a little bit, at least in half point or full point PPR and standard. And there's some crazy leagues where people give you a point for every 5 runs. So if you're in a standard league with a point for every 5 carries, that gives you extra incentive to get bell cow backs, which are really rare. I could see him being right up there in the top tier.
But I guess like you look at like the landscape around the league, and everybody could technically use a running back. That's just kind of how the league is approaching running backs. And so like it's very interesting to see. It's not so much where that running back goes, but it's also who he's with and what's the system. And like Shek just said, Carroll is a run hog. Like he loves running the football. That's going to be his first MO every time he gets it. So it's like that's a different philosophy when you're going to go draft a guy. And I think that's the key factor when you're looking at positional value that you really need to find. Like taking somebody like Walker higher because you're going to have a value drop off is probably smarter to do than to let him go because you're like, hey, I could get somebody who does the same thing, because you probably won't get the same opportunity. At least that's what I was getting after.
Yeah, and that's kind of been the case like since I started with fantasy, right? You mentioned in the intro, Rob, with a really good intro, like that historically, like the first 10 picks have been running backs, right? And that's mostly still the case in redraft leagues. However, more and more like receivers and Travis Kelce tend to fall into the first round, right? But you're still right. Like there's only like 10 to 12 star running backs at most, like guys that you feel good can get 100 yards and a touchdown any given game in the league. So you got to get one of those if you have one of those early picks.
Yeah, I think the one thing that's unquestionable is running back is really, really exciting to talk about this year. There's just so many moving parts right now, so many questions that we still have right now at this point in free agency about what's going to happen in different rosters. And I think Rob will have something to talk about here soon too with that.
Yeah, and it's funny, like you mentioned, Rob. Like it's just the juxtaposition of how we value these fantasy running backs compared to how NFL GMs value running backs, which they're just like,
Yeah.
just like a dime a dozen for them, but for us, it's like exceptionally valuable.
So huge because I mean, you might have a guy like Isaiah, what the dude. Yes, thank you, Pacheco. He could end up being that RB1 that everybody was like, yeah, he's the guy going in. And then you look at like him and say, Walker. Walker is going to be the secure guy just because, how that offense run and all that. But it's like, where do you want to take your risk? That's kind of how I view the running back position. I feel like running back, especially in the first round, I don't want any risk at all.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I look at it. So who's the player that's flying on your radar here, Shaq, coming into this season?
Yeah. So I am like Cam said with Rashaad Penny, I'm not necessarily like super, super high on him yet, but he's definitely somebody that's on my radar, and that's Foreman. I'm a big fan of these guys, like who kind of have good ends of like the previous year and come into the new year with momentum, and in Deontay's case, a new team, right? Where all those David Montgomery yards from last year are available. So last year, post Christian McCaffrey trade, he had 5 games over 100 yards and almost 1,000 yards on the season, despite the fact that he didn't play like at all in September. I think he had like 5 carries all of September, yet still finished with almost 1,000 yards. This is a guy that we thought was done, right? Like he was backing up Derrick Henry and wasn't really that good, to be honest. But then somehow, some way, he just kind of found something in Carolina, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how he parlays that into Chicago. So let's see here. His contract, 1 year, $2 million, so similar to Rashaad Penny. I like these contracts because it's a prove it year, right? So he's extremely incentivized to play as well as possible because he wants to get that long term contract. He has the 6'1", 230. He's got 4.5 yards per carry. And I think what gets me really excited is with Fields, right? Obviously, he didn't have much quarterback help in Carolina. But with Fields and his rushing ability, I can see it right now. Like his ability to stretch the defense horizontally is going to put less in the box, which allows a bruiser like Foreman to continue to get big chunks of yardage through the middle of the field. I think it's going to really work hand in hand. So I'm excited to see Deontay, especially as the first down back in next year. That being said, the con is I'm still really, really high on Khalil Herbert, despite him coming off the injury last year. I still think he is a spectacular running back. And I do see that there's going to be more goal-to-go opportunities in this division, given how bad the Minnesota defense is, given how bad the Detroit defense is, and who knows, like the Packers are kind of up and down. So,
specifically at running too,
exactly.
Specifically at run defense. Yeah, that's a good point.
Especially at run defense, and then because of just general bad defense, you're going to get a lot more goal-to-go opportunities, and I think that's going to go to Deontay. Because he's the bruiser, and so I'm looking forward to him getting double-digit touchdowns and probably over 1,000 yards next year if he can stay healthy. So keep an eye on him. What do you think, Cam?
I like the fit for the same reason you said. I think that what they want for Khalil Herbert is that big back that's going to take it up the middle while Khalil Herbert threatens the edges. But I think over 1,000 and double-digit touchdowns might be a little bit on the optimistic end. And I'm not super convinced that Foreman's a great running back or by any stretch, but I do really like the fit. I think they do plan to use him a lot, and I think that those numbers aren't too far off. I just think they're a little on the optimistic end.
Well, keep in mind that he did have 1,000 yards last year, and that's with like a really bad offense. Everybody knew they were going to run the ball because, who was even the quarterback at the end of last year? Was it Sam Darnold? Whoever it wasn't good, right? So they knew that they weren't going to be doing like anything but running the ball, yet he was still able to get hits.
But in the same games that he was successful when Hubbard wasn't injured, he was mostly successful in the same games. It was like the teams their offensive line could move. They both were productive. The ones where they couldn't, they weren't. So I'm just still not 100% sold on him, but he is really physical, and he's going to serve that role really well.
Well, and to that point, I would definitely say Carolina's line is better than Chicago's, especially so if you're going to go into that position. I don't know if it's just last year or if this year they'll repeat, but like last year, as far as like running production, it's kind of hard because if you're talking Justin Fields, you kind of have to throw the whole thing out because he can run. You know what I mean? Like, so it's just, there's this little, but that also almost fits your argument a little bit too, because you've gotten that running quarterback and now you've got that option play. So it just depends really, is it going to be a Herbert situation that week? Is it going to be a Foreman situation? And is it going to be one of those things where we can tell going in week by week? That's kind of where I'm at with that whole thing, because
Agreed.
they both, you're right, the ceiling is tremendously high for both of them, but the floor scares me.
Yeah, for sure. And you're absolutely right. I feel like like I said, the biggest scare that I have is Khalil Herbert for that, because I think Khalil Herbert is still he's still a really good running back. He played really well last year before his injury. How do you guys feel about Herbert?
I probably like him more than Chicago does.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing too. Like, is it the health thing, or are they going to treat him like DeAndre Swift? Because that's my question. It's like, does Herbert get the Swift treatment? Then I'm in on Foreman, because at least Foreman's going to get the run. But it's a hard thing, because it really will just come down to what is the offensive philosophy.
Yeah.
If they use Herbert like a gadget player, and they kind of use him like, because he's a decent route runner when it comes to like catching the ball. So if they use him kind of like that, and they kind of bring the Swift game to it, sorry, that's the only comparison that I can really think off the top of my head that would just be the perfect fit for like a player like him, to where you could at least trust both of them would be decent RB2s. Especially
that's a good comparison. I didn't even think about that, but like if that is the case, then that makes Deontay Foreman even more like palpable, because people went high on Jamal Williams last year, right? But then you get all those goal to go carries. They had like 17 touchdowns last year or something crazy like that. So there's opportunity if they're going to be humming.
Yeah.
Well, the next move that's on my radar heading into this season was Mattison Cook signing a 2-year, $7 million contract, and most of it's guaranteed. I think it's like 6.35. And the reason this makes it the most interesting running back situation, in my opinion, other than the obvious bias reason for it, the Vikings offered him that contract, and if you guys have noticed, it's actually both higher than Foreman and Penny, and it's for 2 years. So they're giving him a legitimate start to get a crack at it. And after reading some tea leaves and kind of listening to some whispers close to the team, I really truly believe that Cook is all but gone from Minnesota, and it's likely to be either a draft day trade or a post June 1st cut, but he's probably not going to be on the team. That being said, then where does that leave Mattison? To fill the shoes of a top 10 running back at the position. Do I think he becomes that immediately? No. But I do believe they want to give him a real shot if you just look at that contract. And I think he has the skill to be a locked-in RB2 with RB1 upside, obviously depending on how that Kirk Cousins show goes. He's a downhill runner, and he's a sneaky good receiver out of the backfield. So as far as Cook is concerned, I don't think he's done. I know, Sheck, we had this talk during the offseason. I still think he's got it in the tank. And so long as he's not in a committee, I still think he has top 10 ability. He's been nursing a shoulder injury for the last 2 years that he just now got healed and fixed. So basically, that's the reason he's still on the team. For one of the reasons he's still on the team. If he were to be cut before he were able to pass a physical, they would have owed him a bunch of money. So all that being said, all this wishy-washy, like none of it is facts, all of it just completely reading the tea leaves. It seems like they're both going to be viable guys. Moreover, I think Dalvin Cook, if he is fully healed, is going to look like Dalvin Cook of old for at least a year, maybe 2 more tops. So if Cook leaves, I'm investing in both he and Mattison at the position. And if Cook stays, I'm probably not drafting either guy.
Yeah.
I'm going to stay away entirely. And that's kind of how I'm viewing that position.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I also agree that from everything I hear, he probably is gone. And I think Mattison has always produced really well when Cook's been hurt. So no arguments with anything you said there for me.
Yeah, I know, Rob, you've been high on Mattison for a long time, right? You've pretty much had him on your roster every year that I can remember as the handcuff to Cook. And you're right, he's shown RB1 potential. The 2-year, $7 million contract does show that they are committed to him. I think the reason why they are because they've had him in the locker room for the last 3-4 years, however long he's been there, right? So they trust him, right? As opposed to Philly with Rashaad Penny, they don't know yet, and same with Deontay Foreman. Um, I guess the you mentioned like the outcomes that could happen. I totally agree. If Dalvin Cook gets traded or released, Mattison shoots up to a legit like fantasy football RB1 like on your roster, like maybe worth like a second round pick. Um, I think the challenge is that Cook, like, people aren't going to trade for Eckler. They're probably not going to trade for Cook. It's just
No,
that's
no,
going to be
I think he's
challenge.
getting cut. Quite frankly, I think he's getting cut. I
Yeah, I'm
think the
looking at
only
the,
reason he trades is if it's like a seventh round, something where they're like it's a draft day kind of trade where they're trying to
yeah,
get something in, compensation for it.
yeah, makes
It
sense.
feels like a cut. It feels like a cut because that seems to be the most or the least impactful as far as finances is
Yeah,
concerned.
I'm looking at the contract on Spotrac right now. It looks like if they cut him, his dead cap hit is 8.2 million, which is a lot.
Mhm.
But his contract runs through the end of 2025. So I could
Yeah,
see that very well being the case. They just want to be like, same with like Kamara too. They just want to kind of get rid of that big contract. It doesn't make sense in this league to spend a top, to be paying for one of the top 5 paid running backs in the league because it's just, there isn't enough value there. So it makes
and it
sense
fits
to
the
me.
trend.
Yeah.
Fits the trend, right? Like I feel like pay the running back the 2-3 years, get as much run out of him as you can, and then move on. And I mean, I hate to say it, but if we're at least honest with ourselves about the world that we're playing fantasy in, it helps the kind of hopium, that where you're just like,
Yeah.
he could do it this year, top 2.
Do you feel like Mattison has that type of talent though to be like a running back one throughout the season? That's the only thing I'm concerned about. Like when I watch his highlights, I don't think like he's like, wow, he's super fast or like super strong. He is good at a lot of things, but like, what are the things that make you feel so confident in him? Like if he does have the opportunity to have 400 carries this year, that he can kind of hold his own.
That's actually more what I'm leaning towards. He's one of those running backs where it's not the break off every run. I mean, he's got speed, but he's not going to break off every run like Walker would, like he's not going to bust that. But what he is going to do is he's going to give you consistently 4 or 5 yards per carry, that kind of guy. Dump off to him in the flats, which we know Kirk Cousins loves to do. And at the end of the day, it really just becomes a volume thing. They do not, I mean, if the CJ Ham's the only running back they have in the building, like other than Mattison after Cook gets cut or what have you, it's going to really be, and that's why I'm saying more running back 2. And I would feel way more comfortable getting him, say, like the back end of the second round or, the turn on the third, because I feel like at that point you're getting your value. But it's, there's a lot of things that have to fall into place first. And I think we're just all kind of benefiting from the time aspect of it, that we still have a lot of it before we have to actually make that decision.
Nice. Yeah. That's a good one to have on your radar going into the draft and the season.
But it's a volume play, really. He's one of those running backs. He gets better per carry, and it's like you never see him produce until he gets 10 carries. And when he gets those 10 carries, then he actually gets that production.
It'll definitely be interesting to see where Cook goes to if he is a cut. And I think that also is something where you got guys that are in a somewhat vulnerable position, like a Rashaad Penny or even a Dameon Pierce, because they didn't put a ton of draft capital into getting him. There's still these guys that we don't outside of the draft. The draft it's a pretty good class of running backs this year. And then we got a slew of starting running backs that we don't know if they're going to be on their roster this year. So it's really exciting to see how the next couple of months are going to play out.
For sure. And there's a lot of like running backs still available, right? Like Zeke is still available, if I'm not mistaken. Kareem Hunt, there's a lot of guys that like if people really need depth or some talent, they can pick them up on the market.
Yeah. And I know I mentioned this earlier, but along the lines of Cook, you have Mixon in the same exact boat. It seems like he's basically the way out as well. And so who knows what Cincinnati does? Like my sneaking suspicion is you could totally see like Dalvin Cook going to Cincinnati, right? And then it'd just be Cincinnati picking up Dalvin Cook and not really falling off at all from what they did last year. But when you get those legal troubles and stuff, I mean, I know we're not going to talk about Kamara today, but just like you really have to kind of, every game is valuable in fantasy, and you just don't want to waste a draft pick on a guy you're not going to be able to play for the majority of the season.
Yep.
And that's where that is. Yeah. But yeah, so, well, here's some more of the under the radar signings that happen that they're definitely going to have fantasy impact, but your guess is probably as good as mine at how it shakes out, or it's going to be pretty obvious how it shakes out. So we're going to have them kind of under the radar, but keeping an eye on it. We've got Damian Harris to Buffalo. Jamal Williams to New Orleans, David Montgomery to Detroit, and Jamal Williams to Carolina. Is there anything else in there that you guys think of?
Miles.
Miles Sanders.
Yeah.
Miles Sanders, yes, thank you.
I mean, I put David Montgomery and Miles Sanders in there both for following the money. You know, they're both getting a lot of money thrown out of them. The investment means something. For Detroit, I think it was a really dumb decision. You're filling the same role as Jamal Williams, who you were paying like 10x less before, and you still have all these running backs like Zeke that are out there right now. Don't think it was a great decision. Miles Sanders got a lot of money too, and like you were saying, Carolina's line wasn't that bad last year. They can run on average to low end defensive lines, so could be a place where he can go on producing. Because I know a lot of his owners are probably worried about how it's going to shake out leaving Philadelphia.
Well, the other thing is too, I mean, I hate to do this, but it's the quarterback. It's like, what are we going to see there behind center too? That's going to be such a huge factor.
Yeah, for sure.
But you made it. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I know when he left, I definitely was skittish about him. So yeah, that definitely was my fears as well. Any closing thoughts, Sheck, on the running backs?
No, like Cam said, I'm excited for this running back class because there's just so much left to be decided with free agency and with the draft. So excited to see how that pans out over it. And because there's also going to be every year there's injuries, right? The running back is the most injury prone position in the league for obvious reasons. So things are going to change rapidly on this front. So we should definitely revisit this in a few months.
Yeah, and definitely. You know, we're going to have a rookie episode, I'm sure, but we haven't even mentioned really. I mean, we've said his name like once, but we have a generational talent coming in the draft this year. So that's pretty exciting too.
For sure.
Yeah. Excitement all abound. The winds of change are blowing, gentlemen. And in a mid-season trade, the Jaguars acquired Calvin Ridley from the Falcons. I'm sure we all heard about this. He was suspended last season, obviously, for gambling while on a roster, I assume was the official charge, I guess, if you want to call it that. But I think this needs to be talked about here as he has the opportunity to be the biggest wide receiver move to happen this offseason. He's a big wide receiver that moves with a lot of quickness in the open field. That wide receiver room last year was underrated, but productive. And it's very well most likely falling on Trevor Lawrence to be that guy that leads that production. But regardless, they were fantasy productive nonetheless. And that leaves a lot of theoretical targets to be had. The last season that he played, I'm going to just give you this real quick. He was ranked 10th in receptions. He was ranked 7th in targets and 4th in total fantasy points and 4th in points per game. That's kind of amazing. Mm-hmm. And with the quarterback ceiling to be what it is, you could see why a lot of people would be excited about it. Before OBJ signed, which I know we'll talk about later, the wide receiver market was kind of stale. The most influential moves occurred via trade, which is in a stark contrast to the year before, where fellow Jaguar Christian Kirk received a very high price tag to get signed. It seems as if the NFL has cooled on signing big-name guys to their price, while reinvesting their wide receiver resources into trades and the draft. And this has had an impressive effect on the fantasy game. The follow-the-money logic becomes less reliable when talent is often exploited by contract loopholes. More than ever, situation and volume will be king for drafting wide receivers. And that being said, who's on your player radar flying into this season, Sheck?
DJ Moore. This was, again, it was a trade, but DJ Moore was value was pretty much like a late first round pick, before the trade happened. And so the fact that the Bears were able to get a number one wide receiver who hasn't had a good running quarterback pretty much his entire career, right? When he started off, he pretty much had a over the hill Cam Newton, and then it was Kyle Allen, Taylor Heineke, Darnold. It's a pretty bad, right? Nonetheless, he still kept getting 1,000 yards a year and 7 or 8 touchdowns. So if that's the floor with really bad quarterback play, then what's the ceiling, right? And so for me, I see AJ Brown like boost, basically. It's very similar to the AJ Brown situation from last year, right? AJ Brown playing with a pretty bad pass offense with Tennessee, Ryan Tannehill going to Philly and just exploding. His numbers were 1,500 yards, I think 11 touchdowns last year, probably more than that actually. I could see something very similar for DJ Moore.
That's real quick, Kim. I'm just gonna interject. It's interesting, the AJ Brown thing. I'm almost wondering, like, with how well that worked out, especially for Hurts, just taking the next step forward. Is that the formula, or is that like the baseline where, hey, we need at least this kind of success if we're going to make this move going forward? And I'd ask that to both of you guys. I'm curious to see what you think.
You say like the Philly model of drafting a receiver or trading for a receiver, rather?
Yeah, because I mean, if that seems to be where the NFL is heading, where it's like, hey, we're going to make a move for a Hopkins on somebody's, like, he's still got it in the tank, but we're going to grab him, or a guy that's on a struggling offense and they're trying to offload pieces. It seems to be kind of the shortcut to fixing your offense when you have
because talented wide receivers just don't come onto the market very often, right? The Devontae Adams situation was different because he knew that was like a last stand situation, right? But overall, like if you want to start a receiver like Tyreek Hill, like AJ Brown, you got to trade for him. And so I think that is the way to go. Like the fact, like, remember last year, like people were talking about, oh, the Seahawks were so bad, might as well just trade DK Metcalf, right? Pete Carroll was like, no, definitely not. No. We're gonna sign a long-term contract. Even this offseason, like everyone was asking the Bengals GM, hey, what do you want for T Higgins? Because we know you're gonna have to sign him to a long contract. He was like, if you want, a T Higgins, you're gonna have to like draft him because we're keeping him, right? Yeah. And so these valuable like wide receiver ones, it's hard to find them, and so you're gonna have to like provide you're gonna have to trade for them. You won't find them on the open market.
Yeah,
what do you think, Ken?
Yeah, I agree, and I think regardless how you get them, kind of the formula is if you have a quarterback that's getting to a point where it's kind of make it or break it, you need to see what he has in him. You got to put talent around him. And that's what Philly did. That's what Chicago's trying to do right now for Fields. And I think Fields will get it going with the arm. I mean, he was great with the arm in college. The athleticism's been great. The arm's still a little bit, remains to be seen at the NFL level. But I'm looking for a good year for him.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Well, it does seem to be that he has all the tools, but just like lacks consistency. But you give him a number one wide receiver, one of the more consistent target receivers, a sneaky good yak guy, and DJ Moore. And then you take that step. And it's very interesting to see. It's like these little copycat models around the league, like which things work, which things don't. And then I'm wondering, like, who's the first person to whiff on that, like where they make that big trade thinking they got the guy and he ends up setting back their organization and they have to let go of their QB because they missed their window.
That is interesting. I haven't even thought about that. Has that happened recently? I can't think of a time like someone's like spent a bunch of capital on a wide receiver.
Not like a bunch of capital. Yeah, not like that, because I feel like you could technically say Amari, but I mean, even Amari's been productive for the Browns. So like, and I mean, that was really more of a roster dump, and they didn't really pay too much to get him. So I feel like I haven't seen it yet. So it'd be interesting to see when they finally they fall on their face for that one. So
yeah. And that's part of the reason why I'm so high on DJ Moore, right? This formula seems to be working out, and so why wouldn't it work again? Because it just seems to all fit right now.
Exactly, 100%.
And he's used to having to play with subpar arm talent.
Yeah, I mean, just got to get it 12 yards down the field, and he'll do the rest. That's all you need.
Hey, bro, I'm just going to put into evidence that Ohio State-Clemson game for a semifinal game. Justin Fields, 6 passing touchdowns, bombing it.
He's good.
I like to give you crap on Ohio State guys, but the conversation that they were having about Hurts a couple years ago has completely flipped to MVP candidate. Same thing could happen with Fields. He could, in a year or two, be a guy that's right there at the top of the league.
For sure. And DJ Moore and Deontay Foreman are gonna be a big part of that if they need to succeed in order for him to succeed.
Kind of curious that all your moves you're looking at are in Chicago.
Bro, they're the best 3-14 team ever. And not just because they only started doing 17 games, but yeah, bro.
Well, that might be one of the more interesting. I know we're going to do a division pod later in the year, but that might be one of the more interesting divisions too. When it just comes to like shift and flux, like who knows what that thing's going to be like,
Dominated
especially with
by
Rodgers.
Green Bay for the last 30 years with Rodgers and Favre, and now it's wide open.
It's going to be crazy.
Who knows? Maybe Detroit takes over. Maybe they're the team that makes the playoffs every year in and year out from that division. That would be hilarious to see.
That would be such parody. I love it. All right, Cam, who's the player that's flying on your radar headed into this season?
Go from more to more. Keep on the more train. So, and it hurts me to talk about a Brown because Steelers, and also I do not like Deshaun Watson as a human being, but he has been a premier quarterback in the league before, and he could be again. And this is a good piece that they picked up and didn't have to give away a lot to get it either. Elijah Moore was everybody's darling after the second half of his rookie season. He really, over the second half of that season, broke out with about 500 yards, 5 touchdowns over just the second half of that season. He's a guy who in college played almost 100% solely in the slot. So that was the question on him coming into the league, is if he was just a slot receiver. They played him 70% of the time as a rookie out wide. And I was really impressed with how he was able to adapt and play out wide, how good he is at getting the release. He's a good route runner. For being a smaller guy, he's really physical and good at contested catches too. He's got a pretty healthy average depth of target at like 12.7 yards. I just really like what he does, and I think it complements Amari Cooper really well. As you kind of mentioned earlier, Amari Cooper actually had a pretty good year for the Browns, and he's 29 right now. So it's still about a year from when the wide receivers usually hit that over the hill mark. So you want Amari Cooper out wide. I feel like they can play Elijah Moore a little in the slot more than New York did. And I also think he's better against man, where Cooper's better against zone. It just gives Deshaun Watson more targets. It's going to be a good fit, and he's still a young guy. And I kind of throw out last year. I throw out the stats. I throw out the year. He had a bad relationship with the management, terrible quarterback play in New York, gutter play from quarterback. I just throw that year out, and I think about this as a 23-year-old kid who's really, really talented. And could really rise up. I think right now they have him at like 47 in ECR. So he's a guy that I could see being a lot higher than where they have him right now. Not talking like a wide receiver one, but just a guy that could put up numbers and be fantasy relevant.
So I guess my question to you, if you don't mind, with it being a run-first offense through Chubb, is there enough mouths to support him as a consistent wide receiver too? Or are you saying like flex all day, every day?
I think he could be a wide receiver too, but part of that depends on, Njoku has shown flashes of breakout for the last couple of years. Part of it depends on, is Njoku going to take up a lot of that target share? Is he really just competing with Amari Cooper?
There's also Donovan Peoples-Jones, who had pretty good chemistry with Watson towards the end of the year.
Yeah, and who has improved each year. So, yeah, he's in the mix too. But Deshaun Watson, they didn't pay him all that money to run the ball all the time.
Yeah. I don't know, man. So, like, I agree with, like, that was a really good analysis, Cam. I totally agree. Like, he passes the eye test, and he has in years past. And I totally agree. Last year, we should just throw it out because of the whole situation. And if he had gone to a team like Atlanta or something, or somewhere where there's a little bit more opportunity, I'd probably feel better. But it's just that Browns offense, and I don't know if Deshaun's gonna. We're basically betting on Deshaun going back to not even last year, like not even 2 years ago for him, but like 3 years ago for him. Remember, like his last year in Houston, they were like a 4-win team. It was a pretty bad year. His stats were okay, but it was a bad year. So he hasn't really been a great quarterback for a while. And so we're betting on that. We're betting on him getting more chemistry with Elijah Moore compared to Njoku and Cooper and Peoples-Jones. I still like his talent. I didn't know he was 23 years old. I feel like he's like 30. I feel like I've seen him forever, but Um,
Agree. That was 2021 was his rookie year.
wow. Wow. Really?
Yeah.
That, Jeez, I can't
It's
believe that.
crazy.
I feel like I've been watching him for years, or like since like well before the pandemic. But anywho, like yeah, he's young and talented. I just find it hard to invest in anyone on that Cleveland offense other than Nick Chubb.
Yeah,
Well, and that's a good
I
point.
get where
The
you're coming
Chubb,
from
it's like
there too, but I think there's enough mouths to feed with, or I think there's enough of the ball to go around without Deshaun having a prime Deshaun year. And I don't think he is going to
hmm.
have a prime Deshaun year, and I hope he doesn't. Selfish,
Yeah,
but
and that is another like fantasy question. You know, so Cam, Rob, I don't know if you remember, me and Cam had a trade middle of last year. It was a pretty straightforward trade, 1-for-1. I traded Amari Cooper to Cam for DK Metcalf,
That's what I thought
and
Metcalf. Yeah.
yeah, and at the time, like Amari Cooper was like a legit, like I think it was like wide receiver like 10 or even better than that. And DK Metcalf started off the year pretty slowly. I think he was like wide receiver like 23. And the reason why I did that was obviously at the time Deshaun was suspended. I was like, I I just cannot root for Deshaun Watson. You know what I mean? So I don't want to root for, like if I'm rooting for Amari Cooper, I'm by association rooting for Deshaun Watson. I can't come to that, and so I traded for a receiver that had lesser, even though he paid more draft capital for DK Metcalf compared to Amari Cooper. Amari's numbers were better, and so I took that risk just because like I couldn't root for
The
that.
emotional
And so,
baggage.
exactly. And so how do you guys feel about it? Are you able to like
Well,
separate the art from the artist here?
so real quick, I want to say something to the effect of what Cam actually said there. I don't know, or I mean, Shek, you said, kind of echoing what Cam said. I don't know if he has to be Deshaun Watson from, when he was looking like he was going to go to the Hall of Fame, Deshaun Watson. I think he just has to be as good as Jacoby Brissett was before Deshaun Watson came in. And then if that's the case, then Elijah Moore, I feel like, does have some value as far as fantasy goes. But it does sort of gear to looking like one of those moves that's going to be way better for the real football field than it actually is for the stat sheet for fantasy. Where like he just is going to elevate the offense because he gives them another target, and then he'll just be a guy that you could put the ball in his hands and he could run. But to your effect of the art versus the artist, that one's hard because I actually drafted Watson his rookie year or the year after, something like that, one of his early years. And so I had him for a long time, and he was looking to be like my keeper for a while. And then when all that stuff came out, I basically benched him for a whole year and held him on my thing until it turned out that he did that thing. And then I was done. So it's like certain players, I feel like I'm somebody who's very here for like second chances, especially for things like, oh, he was smoking or whatever. But, at the end of the day, like it just comes down to this thing where it's like, it's not worth it to me. I don't want that negative energy there for me. Certain things I'm not there for it.
Totally. And unfortunately, there's a lot of those guys in the NFL, right? A lot of guys who have some sort of baggage. Even like Tyreek Hill had a lot of baggage coming out of college, right? And so like it's certain levels of like how what are you comfortable with? And I guess it's a personal thing.
The player that's going to be on my radar headed into this season is going to be OBJ signing with Baltimore for 1 year, up to $18 million, with 15 of it guaranteed. First off, before I get into the analysis, if I was OBJ, which I'm not, clearly, I would have signed $15 million for whoever in the league wanted to pay me that amount of money to go play football. Because it seemed like everybody was throwing around 7, maybe 8. And to get 15, even if it's just for a year, sign me up.
Yeah.
But this move, to me, is more about Lamar Jackson than it is about OBJ's fantasy production for next year. Assuming that he's 100%, the player that we saw catching passes from Stafford in the playoff run up to their Super Bowl win, his average points per game for the past 2 seasons have been 7.7 in 2001 or 21, and 10.8 in 2020. That puts him at a solid wide receiver 2 floor. The question then becomes, is Lamar coming back? It seems to be the case that they're getting the band back together for one more season at least. But what I think this does for fantasy is ensure that Lamar will have a tremendous weapon at his disposal, and furthermore, releases further pressure that was going to be guaranteed to be on Mark Andrews during coverage all season. I will be drafting OBJ, but but I do not know the price tag that I feel comfortable with right now, because I feel that his name is really going to push that ADP up higher than I'm going to feel comfortable with. But what I am doing on this news is that I'm buying all the Andrews stock I can get this year at tight end. He's firmly going to be my number 2 tight end going into drafts. But the question that I find myself asking, and I'll ask this guys to you both, do you think that his big name will make his ADP too rich, or are you going to invest basically wherever you can get him?
For me, it's definitely going to be too rich. I can already tell you that. I'm not humongous on guys. Like in general, when you brought up Calvin Ridley earlier, I'm very excited to see what he does. But with these guys, I always have question marks when they've spent a lot of time out of football over the last couple of years, like OBJ has. I just don't know if I'm optimistic enough that he's going to be vintage OBJ to really go as high as some people. People are going to draft him like he's going to be vintage OBJ. So I don't think I'm sold on that. I'm sure he'll have a productive season, but I don't know if I'm sold on him being anywhere close to what ADP is going to be.
Yeah. All right. So let me try talking this out here, because I'm still unsure. Full disclosure, I'm a huge OBJ fan. I drafted him when he was on the Browns. Like I'm just a humongous fan of his. The pros are, we talk about following the money. 15 million guaranteed, up to 18 million shows that they think that he's legit, right? And they want him to be the wide receiver number 1. Also means they don't think very highly of Rashaad Bateman. We'll talk about that later. So that's a positive. Number 2, it seems like from the rumors I've heard, Lamar was asking the Ravens to pick up OBJ and DeAndre Hopkins, and they've apparently acquiesced on one of those 2 things and overpaying for him. And so that's a pro, because that means that indicates Lamar's probably coming back, because they are acquiescing to his demands, even if it is for just one more year. The con is obviously the injury piece, of course, but it's also age, unfortunately. And I hate to say this, because we're all around in our early 30s, but early 30s is really old for wide receivers, right? Last year, do you guys know how many wide receivers age 31 or above had over 400 yards last year? Zero. The only one who got more than 400 yards was Travis Kelce, who's obviously a freak and a tight end. But I think the player with the most yards age 31 or above last year was Adam Thielen, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
So,
which makes it crazy,
right?
That he just got a 3-year contract.
Yeah, for sure. But that notwithstanding, the numbers are real, right? And the situation, we are talking about injury, which is different than Ridley, right? Where Ridley could have been just working out and doing things normally. He's been having to overcome his second ACL injury in as many years. That's tough. And so I don't know, man. I think you're right. I think the name recognition is going to cause the casuals to kind of overdraft him, and for that reason I might be out. But if the season starts off and he gets gets cut by a team in fantasy, and I see him on the waivers, I definitely might grab him and see if he can get some sort of chemistry going with Lamar over the year.
I think that you're both kind of right there too. It really is just going to be the name value and who takes him. But I guess if you could take ADP out entirely, where would you value at him? Like a wide receiver 2? Or do you actually think because Lamar is such a gifted athlete and such a talented thrower, that he has that upside to be a wide receiver 1, and you would value him as such going into the season?
Let's be real. You talked about this, Rob. Mark Andrews is wide receiver 1 there, right? Clearly.
Yeah, 100%.
And the problem is I've never seen Lamar who's the best receiver Lamar has had? Marquise Brown, right? And Marquise Brown has some nice years, but it wasn't anything spectacular. So, what I don't know what the realistic expectations are here. I don't know if Lamar can even throw through those X receiver wideouts, right? Maybe he is more just a seam thrower, Mark Andrews, and then of course running the ball. And if that's the case, I don't know if it's worth the risk, especially in a run first offense.
Well, that's the thing too. It's is it the offensive philosophy that's held Lamar's to a more limited facet, Or is it literally the fact he's had no weapons? Or, there's just so many things that you could argue against why he couldn't do one thing or another. But like everything that he can do, he excels at. So I just feel like I'm very hard pressed to be like, well, he can't hit the seam, like, or you can't hit the cross like he does the seam. You know what I mean? So, but I think you're right 100% when it comes to Andrews. I think he is that guy. And the comp that I'm going to throw out, where I feel like OBJ this is kind of where I feel his season's going to be, like a late Steve Smith. When he was, I don't know, that camp might be a little bit slightly early. Yep, right when he was in Baltimore. That kind of like, I don't hate to say possessional guy, but kind of that guy they go to for those third down stretches, those screen passes. Like you're not going to get a lot of red zone looks, but you're going to get those middle of the field play. So like PPR, I'm feeling comfortable in a wide receiver 2. But I just feel like he's going to get drafted like a wide receiver 1, and I don't want any part of that.
For sure. There's one more piece I want to bring up too, and it's the Lamar piece here. So remember, like last year, Lamar got injured, of course, but then most people said he could have come back like towards the end of the year, but he had no incentive to, right? Because of the contract situation. Nothing's changed on that front for next year, right? He's probably going to sign the non-exclusive franchise tag, and the whole situation is going to play out again. And if it plays out again, like how much does OBJ's values, dip if it's Anthony Brown throwing to him for the last 6 weeks in the fantasy football playoffs? Probably significant.
That's a really good point,
right? And so we got to keep that in mind.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point, because we're kind of all at the mercy of what Lamar wants to do, and as of now, the energy kind of feels like he's excited for this season, but that could shift if they're 4 games down into the season, and he's like, I'm done with this. Like, I'm over. I mean, we have zero idea what he's doing, because he's actually the one player we've seen make moves in public that seem to be very for himself and the future of his career. And that's how players should be. They're the lifeblood of the league. And to, depress their value artificially just because you can, and then neglecting to sign him 2 years ago when you should have. I mean, you won the MVP. Why didn't you sign him? He would have been cheaper than Burrow. He would have been cheaper than Herbert. I mean, shoot, that Mahomes contract that he signed, like he restructured it. So like, I mean, he would be just around the same, give or take, as like Mahomes. So I just feel like, why aren't they sold? That tells me more about the Ravens than I think it does about Lamar. They're a little too old school to be like, hey, look at this amazing person we have here. How do we fit him into this offense? No. We have this amazing Corvette, and we're going to run it in the snow. We have this amazing Corvette, and we're going to run it in the mud. It's like, why are we doing these things when you're not? We saw what Justin Fields did when Nagy was the coach. He looked like garbage. But then the second they started playing to his strengths and just moved the pocket slightly to the left or the right, he turned into an all-star athlete, or all-star position, or all-star quarterback at the position. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, it's this weird like dichotomy of like, it almost seems like the Raven. Now this is not conspiracy or conjecture or whatever, but it just feels like to me they've not set him up for success, almost so they can like say, "Well, see, but you're not actually worth what you would command." And I don't know. That's my little side.
So I don't know if we want to go too deep into Lamar, because I feel like we could talk for hours on this. But here, I'll give you like high level what I'm thinking, like what the situation is. So I feel like when the Ravens drafted Lamar in the very end of the first round back in whatever it was, 2016, 17, 18, I think what they assumed was just that, hey, we got a Corvette here. Let's just run him as much as possible. And then, towards the end of his contract, try to trade him for a couple of first round picks, and then try to, restock at the quarterback position, because I feel like they were so sullied by the Joe Flacco situation. They paid a quarterback a bunch of money, and he didn't pan out. However, obviously Lamar well outplayed like any expectation, right? Getting to MVP. I feel like both sides are at fault here. The Ravens should have signed Lamar to a long-term contract a couple of off seasons ago, but because I feel like that was their plan, where they wanted to just run him into the ground and trade him, they didn't feel incentivized to do that. They should have, because they knew that the quarterback market would continue to increase over the year. So the smart thing to do with young star quarterback is to sign them as soon as possible. That's what Cincinnati's trying to do with Joe Burrow right now, Philly with Jalen Hurts, etc. But that's not what they did. So that was their mistake. Then you got Lamar, who's decided to represent himself, which I understand that for sure. You talked about like people, taking ownership of their own, situation, and I totally respect that. However, the way Lamar's been like acting, I feel like, so this isn't the first time that we've seen a player try to represent themselves, right? On the Seahawks, both Bobby Wagner and Richard Sherman represented themselves. Now, those are slightly different situations because they're not star quarterbacks. But the thing is, and I heard them talk about this in interviews, like they spent those are two really smart guys. They spent a lot of time studying the ins and outs of the contract and try to do all the stuff that agents essentially have to do to prepare to be an agent. That's what they did, and that's how they were able to like negotiate on behalf of themselves and then get their contract. I don't think Lamar's interested in that. I think Lamar's more interested. If you've seen his Instagram post, he's like more interested in just boosting his like recent like workout business that he has. And so like, yeah, and there's like weird things going on there. And so I feel like he's not doing himself any favors here as well. And then the last piece is I feel like he's completely in the last 2 weeks completely lost any leverage that he had because he was the one because he asked for OBJ. And then when they got OBJ, I told you, Rob, after they got OBJ, I was like, no, it's not a big deal. Lamar's still gonna, play he's still gonna try to get out of Baltimore. But what I didn't know at that time was while we were talking about that, literally like that was the night after they signed OBJ. Lamar and OBJ were at Live in Miami partying it up together, right? And obviously there's pictures and videos of that. So it seems like Lamar's lost all like leverage whatsoever for this offseason. And so he's going to have to sign and play for $32 million, which is a humongous discount. And I can't imagine he's going to be very happy going into the year.
No, you're right. I mean, it does, you're sowing further content or at least kicking it down the line. But you're right. There faults on both sides. And that Sherman one was interesting because the way the media portrayed him was like, could you believe this athlete is contract negotiating? Preposterous. And it's just like, okay, come on. Man went to what? Stanford? Yeah, he went to Stanford, and it's just like, can we give these men some respect and not just treat them like?
But you got to do the homework though, and obviously Richard Sherman can do homework because that's what he did in Stanford all the time, right? And Bobby Wagner too, and they went to Utah State, which I would imagine is not the best academic institution, but he's still like they did the homework, and that's the reason why they can go into those negotiations with Pete Carroll and say, hey, I'm worth this much, and these are the clauses that I want to add, blah blah blah. I don't think Lamar's done that.
Where did Lamar go to college?
Louisville.
They can't even figure out how to get people into their stadium without it taking an hour. So I don't think it's the best educational institution. But I agree that it's a big problem, him representing himself. It's been a big problem. I'm not necessarily against anybody doing it, but for him specifically, it's been a big blunder.
And now we're going to look at our under the radar receivers that got signed that we're keeping an eye on. We've got Jacoby Myers for Las Vegas. We've got Brandon Cooks in Dallas. And a little personal side project I'm excited to watch, Adam Thielen in Carolina. I know we kind of talked about that last one a little bit, but it's going to be easy. It's going to be really curious to me to see like ADP where this guy ends up falling.
Is he wide receiver 1 Carolina right now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he is. And I could just see a world where he's just a PPR monster, but like I could also see a world where he's just not draftable. So it's this just crazy range of outcomes. And if I find myself in that little spot where I'm ready to take a shot at like a receiver, I'll go for it.
So if you're in a dynasty league right now, are you OBJ or Adam Thielen?
The secret third option that I don't know that exists because I don't want any of those guys in dynasty.
You're near the end of the draft. You got to pick one. OBJ or
Thielen.
Thielen
might get some sort of some sort of connection with Bryce Young or CJ Stroud, and then who knows, maybe that happens.
Yeah.
Well, because I mean, 1 year or two is kind of where you're looking at.
Yeah. I just think it's nuts to give a grandpa a 3-year contract.
Yeah, that one's rough. And I mean, he still looks like athletically he can play the position. Like he still gets separation. He still catches the ball. But I mean, you're going to ask him to do a lot less than what the Vikings asked him to do. And so long as they're not asking him to play like he did as a wide receiver 1, I don't see a problem with it. I mean, it wasn't a lot.
It's
more than probably you should have paid him.
What other talent do they have there? Terrace Marshall.
DJ Shark.
Yeah, DJ Chark. Yeah. Coming off a year where he had some big plays, but he didn't look like 100%.
No. And that's the thing. I mean, it really comes down because then you've got people like Brandon Cooks. It's like, is that an offense that you really want to have a second wide receiver in?
Yeah.
Jacoby Myers, I know we'll talk a little bit later, but it's just like that's another one where I have zero idea how that could end up.
Yeah. Yeah, Brandon Cooks is an exciting one to me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously, he's going to be the big time beta, but I think there's when Dak's healthy, there's definitely enough offense to support multiple wide receivers, and Noah Brown's gone now.
There was enough offense to support wide receivers, and now they kicked the guy out the door. Yeah, with Kellen Moore leaving, and now they're Mike McCarthy coming out on record saying he wants to score less points this season. The goal is to not score as many touchdowns as you normally do. And to me, when I hear that as a fantasy non-expert, I guess, I think red flag, red flag, red flag, because even if they do end up bucking that trend, their defense is too good to not be exactly what they end up doing this year. I mean, if they end up having to throw the ball, it's because their defense didn't return value. And I just don't see that happening.
So again. You're not in CeeDee Lamb being the 101?
Oh, no. I like CeeDee Lamb. Trust me. If we're talking just CeeDee Lamb, not 101. No. And my 101's and my other crush out there. I got a little JJ. It's going to be my 101 for sure. Yeah, but... No, well, we'll see. I do have some firepower. You never know what could happen in a crazy world.
Mahomes for JJ.
No, never going to happen. But yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, you really it comes down to personal value. And it's just, the question is where are they going to contribute? And I just see Cooks could totally end up being that guy you pick up on a streaming option. But, are you going to want to draft him? Maybe at the end, but I don't want to plan to draft him anywhere in my draft.
Sure.
Yeah, I agree with all that. And on the note of Josh Allen, another one I put in was Deontay Hardy for under the radar, just because of what I've heard about. I mean, they gave him more money than you would expect them to give him. And the talk is that they really like him and that they're going to try to do with him this year what they tried to do with Isaiah McKenzie last year. They're more successful doing it with him, could be a flex play. So, and also a guy who, does returns too. He could take one to the house, be relevant that way, but nothing more than a flex.
And the Diggs situation is kind of weird right now, so we have to be aware of that. And if that does kind of fall and Diggs leaves for some reason, that boosts all the other Buffalo wide receivers.
Yeah, we do seem to be gearing up for in a year, we're going to have a major wide receiver landscape shift. It's like starting this year to next. Once all those draft picks come in, it might look like an entirely different league when it comes to drafting wide receivers. All right. I'm going to keep this one short and sweet. I think we're all aware of the tight end landscape right now. You either have one or you don't. You're either one of the privileged few who invested early, or you're toiling on the waiver wire weekly looking for a pulse. There are always those outliers that elevate to less than putrid, but 0 to 10 points is a horrible variance to deal with. Not this year. Nope. Not again. My vow to myself during these windy seasons of change is to take a tight end with one of my first 4 picks.
Ooh.
I want to live the high life at the position and realize if I have a down week, at least I'm not streaming guys like Cade Otton, Hunter Henry, or Robert Tonyan. Will one of these outliers become a fantasy rock star? Statistically speaking, sure, they will. But I have no idea when or who. And I don't want to play musical chairs at tight end to find out.
Rob, I was in the same position last year where I was like, I'm not going to let it happen to me this year. So in a lot of drafts, I went out and got Kyle Pitts. And it worked out great.
Yeah.
That's the problem, right? Other than Kelsey, there is no other surefire can't miss start. Even Mark Andrews, when Lamar was out, his production just absolutely went into the tank. And so that's why I needed to go and I got lucky with Evan Engram, right? But if it weren't for that, you're right. It's just there's no sure things other than Travis Kelce at the position.
No. And then furthermore, I mean, it ends up
Yeah,
being one of those
that's
things where
unless
you
you
said
can
this.
get Kelsey.
Mm-hmm.
No.
Well, no, but I mean, Sheck said this. I mean, Evan Engram, like that's the guy. I mean, isn't he one of those ones we all took late and he ended up being the guy? Like every year, there's always
Yeah,
one or two that make that leap and is consistent that year. But then that guy
yeah,
always ends up being that like questionable guy next year where you're like, oh
Dallas
crap,
Goddard.
and
Dallas
yeah,
Goddard,
and
Kyle Pitts,
it's
like it's the
and it's
same
hard.
thing where it's like, go ahead, Cam. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to predict when they're going to break out too, because like Evan Ingram, everybody was pretty much done with him at that point. Like there was the Evan Ingram, this is his breakout year, every year talk until the year where it actually happens. And yeah, and a lot of people think like Dalton Schultz is younger than he is. Some of these guys have been around longer than you think before they break out. But in general, most tight ends don't until at least year two at the soonest. But it's a very hard position to predict when they're going to break out, if they're going to stay healthy, if they're going to stay relevant outside of like a Kelsey who just produces year after year after year. And you guys know that I like to just lock in with George Kittle and get lost in those eyes.
Yeah. Well, and that Kittle's another good one there too, because his value shifted last year. He wasn't asked to block nearly as much in the offense. Like he was able to get out there and catch balls from Purdy and being that safety release valve for Purdy. And I think you have that kind of weird dichotomy where you really have to pick and choose your battles, where it's like, if I'm investing a late round pick in a tight end, I want to make sure that at least he's got upside. Because if I have to drop him later, I'm not searching for floor, I guess, if I'm going to take a later tight end. I'm shooting for pure ceiling and then just hoping I don't ever crash. Because at the end of the day, you're basically with everybody else anyway. If you're trying to play this, oh, well, he'll at least get me 7 points. No, he won't. But that leads me to the player who's on my radar heading into this season. And that's Darren Waller being acquired by the New York Giants from the Las Vegas Raiders for a 2023 third-round pick. Now, this one is one of those gut feelings, purely vibe analysis. Not smart, I know, but even the stats are in agreement. When Waller is healthy, he averages 7.4 points per game, but he only has played 9 games last year due to a hamstring, and only 11 games the year prior. Despite these tight end 5 numbers, if you combine the way Daboll wants to run his offense in New York, and, he's the only person to catch the ball on that field besides Saquon Barkley, you can see that the ceiling and the floor being there is pretty tremendous. Last year, Daniel Jones feasted off of rushing when the play breaks down, due to the way that opposing teams like to play zone against them. I could definitely see a world where Waller feels that need for them and becomes the safety valve that Bellinger looked like he was going to be before getting hurt last season. I'm following my gut this year, and if I whiff on Kelsey, Andrews, and Goddard, then I'm targeting Waller as my guy.
I think that's a good one. That's a really good one. I could see Waller being the number 2 tight end next year because of the fact that he's in Daboll's offense. He's wide receiver number 1, basically. The only thing that I have concerns with, so he is, I don't know if you guys know this, he's the number 1 paid tight end in NFL history. Like, he's getting paid. And what has me concerned is it was the Raiders who paid him. And this was like 6 months ago or something like that. This was like, in the middle of last year, I think, or early last year. They paid him like the best tight end ever. And then just a few months later, they trade him to the Giants. Like, what do they know that we don't know? Is it just the fact that the Raiders are a dysfunctional organization? They don't know what they're doing? Or do they see something in his, I don't know, his medical history or the way he's performing where they think that he's no longer a top tier option? I don't know what that answer is, but that's my only concern. But like I said, I can still see the Raiders being very wrong and Waller going off in the Daboll offense.
Well, to that point too, and like you said, we can't really know. We weren't in any of those rooms with them, but it does kind of feel like they paid him, and then he got hurt, and then kind of saw the situation around him and was like, "No, I'm good. I got paid. I don't want to come back, and like I'm not going to be 100% healthy." And that was one of the things he actually said too, is he said he doesn't want to come back and play until he is 100% healthy and can come out on the field. And when you're getting hurt, you come back and then get hurt again. You have that mentality where like I'm not coming back until I'm 100%.
Lamar Jackson.
And 100%. And that's what I feel. This like weird, like I said, it's more of a gut call, but I just have this feeling in my jellies that I feel like he wanted out. And they were glad to let him out because he didn't want to play for him. It's like, do you want a player to say, hey, low key, I don't want to play here, or just go to the media and say I want out? Like I feel like either way, you're getting your answer. But moreover, you look at what they did to solve the tight end issue. I mean, who do they have? Foster Moreau, maybe? I mean, I don't even think he's on the team anymore. So it's like they're literally just going to fill the tight end position with slot receivers. So it's like I don't even know what's going on down there for Mike McDaniel and the Vegas Raiders. But
Josh McDaniel.
Josh McDaniel, thank you for the Vegas Raiders. But I just,
yeah,
that one scares me. You know what I mean? So that one's like I could see why he would want out, and if he was just like, I'm not playing for you guys, I'm out of here.
Yeah, but usually the player isn't in charge, right? It's like if the Raiders were really high on him still, they would be like, no, screw you, you're staying here, But for some reason, they were like, okay, sure, we'll trade you, or get rid of you.
It feels like they're rebuilding, though, doesn't it? Like, I mean, if you're taking a 30-some-year-old tight end, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I could see them taking a quarterback in this draft and then be like, oh, that makes sense now why they traded him, because why keep a 30-year-old tight end who, like you said, has made some of the most money, of any tight end at the position. Mm-hmm. So now you're talking about a high-priced guy that you really can't make use of.
Yeah.
So, but you're right. I mean, it is interesting, and that's definitely the red flag behind it. But I mean, that kind of is the same with health too, with most players. But I'm curious to see what Cam thinks, because I know he's kind of he likes the Giants' offense, if I'm not mistaken, right?
I thought that it was better last year than I expected, but no, I don't really like their offense that much.
Dude, you were a big Kadarius Toney guy during.
That's what I was thinking.
I'm
Wayne Gallman.
It's receivers. That's what it is.
But no, I mean, I'm gonna not have any shares in Waller. I don't think. To me, it's been too long since he's played good football for me to go. If I'm gonna try to go high like you are on a tight end as much as I can. I'm gonna, guys go really quick, especially on Kelsey. I want to get a share in Kelsey every year, and I'm never willing to pull the trigger how high he goes. But so I'm pretty sure I'm gonna whiff on Kelsey. But I would if I'm going top tier, I'm going to let it drop a little bit if I can't get on to either Kelsey, Kittle, Andrews, or Goddard or Engram. I'd feel better about any of those five than I would about Waller. I think he's definitely going to produce. They're paying him too much for him not to produce at all. But there's just too much question for me to go as high as he's going to go. He's going to go like a top tier tight end. So I have him a tier down.
Mm. So I guess that's interesting, because like I see him almost the other way with that. Like maybe people are going to be, well, then again, we were just talking about the hype and the positional being there. It's interesting because is he deflated because of him not finishing a full season? Yeah. Or is it, you know what I mean? That's a good point, because it does become, where's that value at?
And
is he end up
Fantasy Pros ECR, just to give you a kind of gauge on where they have him right now. They have him at 7, right below Goddard, right above Freiermuth, also above Engram. So Ingram's the only one on this list that's below him that I would upgrade to above. And I maybe would upgrade him. I would feel better about Waller than Pitts, who they have above him. I'd also feel better about him than they have at number 3, Hawkinson.
See, Hawkinson's my number 3 though, so I'm not mad about that. I actually think he's going to have a really good season. And moreover,
but hey,
no,
guys,
I actually liked him going into last year.
You guys go ahead.
Yeah.
Continue.
Moreover to that, what he just said, I actually feel that kind of, I don't know, that I hate to say, but I just feel that Kittle, I would rather have Waller over Kittle this year. That's to me is the line. It's like, Kittle was great last year. The year before, he was not consistent. And moreover, Kittle was not actually like, it wasn't like he was consistent start to finish last year. He came on around Brock Purdy. So the argument could be, well, it's Brock Purdy's show now, or it could be he's not going to be healthy, and what is Kittle going to do? To me, I think Waller has way more opportunity there than Kittle will. And that's so like to have him above him, that seems like it doesn't be there for me. But like for Goddard, Andrews, Kelsey, I would definitely put them all ahead for sure. I mean, and five seems about right for Waller, 5 or 6. But I mean, if you get a 5 or 6 and he actually returns on that weekly value, and you can actually get him in the 6th round, I'm down for that. But
yeah, I definitely get what you were saying with Kittle, and I still would have him slightly above personally. But it all comes down to you personally like.
Mm-hmm.
But I definitely think there are some question marks there as well, especially the last couple years. His A.dot's gone down a little bit every year. His, he's a Yak Pro is what he's known at. His Yak's gone down a little bit every year. But to me, just the question of Darren Waller just hasn't played a elite season at tight end in 3 years? A complete one?
Yeah, but I guess. But I mean, you're not drafting her to be elite.
Well,
if you're drafting him to be elite, you just drop it.
Number 7.
What would you have to spend? What would you have to spend to get Kittle?
Yeah, well,
a third round pick.
In the same thing, they have him 4 and they have Waller 7. But you were talking about, like him being somebody that you're going up high to get. I guess. Yeah,
it's more like if I whiff at the top tier, he's my second tier.
Yeah,
there. Like he's the guy, and then under him, I'm even more questioning. It's almost like he's in a tier of himself where I feel like it's a level of safety where I'm okay with, but I don't expect him to return me 20 points in a week.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, I get where you're coming from, but I don't.
Because Kittle, you're gonna have to spend at least a 3rd round, 4th round draft pick.
And I'm kind of like where you're saying if you miss the top tier, you're all in on Waller. I'm kind of more of the mindset, if I miss the top tier, I'm going down another tier below Waller to like Njoku, Schultz, Knox.
Mm-hmm.
If I can't get one of those top guys, I don't want a question like the questions that I have with Waller or Pitts or even Freiermuth. I'd rather just go down one more tier, down to like a Knox, Schultz, and Njoku.
But then again, I did that last year too, and you really do end up playing this like I have to have 4 tight ends on my team to play which one has the matchup. And quite frankly, you come down to roster building, it hamstrung me all season. Yeah. Having 3 tight ends on your roster is just preposterous, and ends up being.
I want to be in that top tier for sure. That's the goal is to try and get somebody in that top tier that you feel really comfortable about, but it doesn't always happen. It's tough out there drafting tight ends.
It is.
Speaking of which, I'm let's who you got on your radar, Shaq, for tight end.
Yeah, well,
I know we already talked about him.
Yeah, we already talked about it. We are kind of coming up on time, so maybe it makes sense to see it. I'll just be really quick. Evan Engram, same, not exactly in a new place, but he was a free agent. He's getting paid $11 million this year, 1-year contract, prove-it year, top 10 paid tight end this year. He looked great last year. He looked great in the playoffs last year, too. He had 100 yards and a touchdown. So I'm going to be high on him. I think he has the most momentum with Trevor Lawrence right now. And so I think that's why, Ken mentioned him in the top non-Kelsey tier. I would say that too. I think he belongs in that Mark Andrews, Dallas Goedert tier as well going into next year.
Yeah, and we can always edit down, but we'll keep the rebuttals the rest of the way in a little shorter so you can get out in time for yoga.
Cool. We got half an hour, so we're good. Yeah. Yep. Hot yoga.
Love it.
No goats in there?
No goat yoga this time. Nope.
Yeah, but I mean, just to do a quick side from me, I'm all in on Evan Engram. Even with there being a lot of mouths to feed, I think that a lot of analysts, a lot of experts, and me myself, I feel like this could be the year that Trevor Lawrence takes that jump into the elite tier at quarterback and is an MVP finalist. So I'm in on that offense. I'm in on Trevor Lawrence. I'm in on Evan Engram.
Cam, why don't you fire off and tell us who's your tight end that's on the radar for you?
Dalton Schultz on here. He got 1 year, kind of another prove-it contract, 1 year, $9 million. That's for the tight end market, as you guys know, has been kind of slashed by a great rookie class coming in right now. So it's not bad money, but it's definitely not something that Schultz is going to be happy with. Him and his management really whipped. He was playing for $10.6 million under the franchise tag last year. he had an offer, I believe, for 26 million guaranteed over 3 seasons to stay in Dallas before they ended up tagging him. So going for one of those probably would have been better. But I do like the fit, although we don't know much about Houston's offense right now, because this is new coaching staff, new system. It's going to be a system that is most likely being put in place for a rookie quarterback. And you want to have a safety blanket for a rookie quarterback. And that's the type of tight end Dalton Schultz is. He isn't a take the top off. He's not doing anything fantastic, making people miss the way that Kelsey does. But he's a really good short to intermediate route runner, 7.5 average depth of target, like 3 yards after the catch. He normally falls forward. He's good at using his body. He's good at shielding people off, and he can be a good safety blanket for a young quarterback. So, and I love redemption arcs. He bet on himself, and he lost, and now he's got to prove it year to bet on himself again and maybe win this time.
That's a good one. That is a good one. I didn't know that was the history. I didn't know that he rejected a deal last year. Dang, you're right. Like, assuming that the Texans get a quarterback, whether it's Bryce Young, CJ Stroud with the number 2 pick, or they wait till the number 12 pick and pick up their quarterback, like a Hendon Hooker or whatever. Like, whoever it is, they're going to need a safety valve for sure. And going back to the reason why I was high on Waller, there's just no other like receivers. Who was wide receiver 1 there with Brandon Cooks? Is it Nico Collins? Like, right? Like, who else is that quarterback going to throw to?
Yeah.
It just makes sense.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah. And I mean, you talking safety blanket, new coach, just, it does seem like feed the tight end when things break down.
Yeah, I think,
and honestly, that's what you want at that point in the draft.
Yeah, I think the fit is really good, and I get why the Cowboys left on him. That game against the 49ers, he had a couple mental lapses that I think really got him on the bad side of the fans, and I think the Cowboys want to not have to pay him and get one of those great tight ends that's coming in the draft. I think a lot of mocks have Kincaid going to him, so they think they can get the same type of player and one of these good rookies coming in and pay him less money.
All right, so some of the under the radar tight ends we have coming here. Not exciting, but you could see some world where they could do some things. We got Mike Gesicki for New England. We got Irv Smith, former of Minnesota, in Cincy, which sneaky, if he stays healthy, I could see a world where he could get some targets and do some things. And then we've got Hayden Hurst as well.
I think same thing with Hayden Hurst. If he stays healthy, he's a guy who can get some targets, also blocks well. Yeah. Mike Gesicki, he's going to catch some passes. He's never going to block, and he's just going to be Mike, and he's going to showboat a lot.
Yep. And I was going to say, he's just going to make it confusing in New England. You're not going to want any of the tight ends because of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
So QB is all about coaching and talent that surrounds these signal callers. If you made it this far in football, you're plenty good enough to excel at this level of the game. Unfortunately, not all situations are created equally. So assuming the player takes on the challenges of the next level, you are at the mercy of circumstance. None of this is news, but it's more evident and important to understand this in fantasy. QB value relies on their legs just as much as their weapons in today's games. Top 5 guys need to be able to do both, or they aren't worth a high draft pick, in my opinion. Take a guy like Jacoby Brissett in Washington. They found a stable guy to have at their center if their confidence in Sam Howell turns out to be misplaced, which I could see that going. Either way, the situation is night and day from last season. I'm back in on McLaurin. Other skill guys for this year, I'm also in on. Brissett was very efficient last season, and I can't wait to see if he can repeat under Eric Bieniemy calling the shots. Washington should be able to put numbers up on offense, and I have a feeling that Bieniemy's signing will be his coming out party, and I'm a huge fan of the way he manages the ball, especially in the red zone. I'm looking at them being able to score a lot of points. Loving him running this scheme for sure. And it's just going to be one of those things where it's all stock across everybody from last year. And that being said, who's on your radar heading into this year, Cam, for quarterbacks?
Yeah, so I got Derek Carr here, and A lot of the chatter I've heard from experts and even from fan forums and just from friends of mine, is how upset people are that Las Vegas moved on from him, and how good he is. And I'm a little bit in the other direction. So last year, he was 24th in completion percentage at 60%. A lot of the years in Las Vegas, he was actually a lot higher in the rankings for adjusted completion percentage. He's 25th in adjusted completion percentage last year. So he was throwing a lot of uncatchable balls. But I do like a comeback arc. I love a comeback arc. I love seeing him at the Pro Bowl passing competition fired up. And I love how fired up he is. And I think he's a worker and a passionate guy. And they have there's not a lot of depth for his targets, but they have two good ones in Olave, and if Michael Thomas can stay healthy. I do think in the short amount of time that Michael Thomas was healthy last year, that he showed signs that he can still make plays and can still be a red zone target while Olave can just chew up yards. So I think he's got some targets there. I'm not like 100% sold that it's the right coaching staff and the right situation for them to really be a contender right now. And then you got these questions with Alvin Kamara's legal troubles too. So it's the jury's still out there, but I'd love to see him have a comeback. ECR right now, he's 18. He's right below Russell Wilson. He's right above Trey Lance. I kind of like where he's at in ECR right now. I definitely trust him more than Trey Lance, tenfold. But I don't know if at first when I saw that ranking, I was like, I trust him more than Russell Wilson too. But I don't know. I could maybe see Russell Wilson having a bounce back year with a coach that I am very sure of in Denver. So I kind of like where they have him at 18. I could see him having a better year than that, but I'm not necessarily willing to bet on it.
Yeah, I totally agree. So Derek Carr is so interesting. Like that whole situation, you're right. Like it doesn't make, first of all, from the Vegas perspective, if I were a Vegas fan, it's like, why do we force Carr out of the building just to get a guy who's a little bit less good than him at most things than Jimmy Garoppolo? But that notwithstanding, like Derek Carr, like, I'll refer to this game a lot, but I remember watching the Seahawks Raiders game from last year and coming away like having even more respect than ever for Derek Carr. He got injured. I think it was the second series of the game. I don't know if you guys remember that game. It was like an epic game, Seattle versus Vegas. It was a game where Josh Jacobs played like Black Hercules. It was insane.
Yeah,
but Derek Carr was incredible too. He got hurt. Like he cracked his rib on a throw that got intercepted, if I'm not mistaken, in like the second series. I thought he was going to be out the whole game, but somehow, some way, just kind of fought through it and had an amazing game. And after that, I had so much more respect for him. But then what happened was a few weeks later, and I know, Cam, you remember this because you had Derek Carr on your roster last year. He had like a game against a pretty average to below average defense, and he put up 0 fantasy points. Yeah. And so you're going to have those ups and downs. And I think it's going to be the case in New Orleans too, right? It's because I totally agree. Dennis Allen's, I don't think, a very good coach, and the weapons, there's way too many questions around Michael Thomas and the running back Kamara. So it is, I think 18 is probably right for him. I probably have the same analysis as you do.
Yeah. It's kind of one of those things where, like you said, there's games where he looks great, and even years. Like he had 2 years in a row where he passed for over 4,000 and hovered close to 70% on completion percentage, but then there's other years like this last one where he's 60, and even from game to game, I think I had him the year before that too, and it's a lot of hit or miss.
Right, and it's dangerous in fantasy. Right? I think Rob and I were talking about this a few weeks ago. It's like, I'm assuming in ECS, Kirk Cousins is somewhere close to that range, right? Somewhere in the 15-ish range. I feel a lot more comfortable with Kirk Cousins because he is so much more predictable, right? We know what's going to happen. He's going to put up good yards. It's going to be relatively consistent. If it's a primetime game, you're not going to put him on the roster, and that you can work around, right? Whereas Derek Carr, if he's putting up terrible games against the Arizona Cardinals and then playing well against a good defense, it just becomes a lot more harder to predict, and that's why it probably decreases the value some.
So I agree with you on what you just said, but I will tell you, you'd probably be surprised. And for listeners that we haven't explained it to yet, ECR is expert consensus ranking. It comes off of Fantasy Pros. But they actually have Kirk Cousins all the way up at number 11, right behind Deshaun Watson and right ahead of Tua. So Kirk Cousins is actually almost he's one tier ahead of Derek Carr. So they have Derek Carr in tier 4, and they have Kirk Cousins near the top. And Derek Carr is at the top of tier 4. They have Kirk Cousins near the top of tier 3. And then behind Cousins, you got Tua, Jones, Geno, Goff, Rodgers, Wilson. Then we get to Carr.
Wow, no respect for Geno.
Well, quite frankly, Geno needs to not be in that list. But I think basically everybody else there, you just said we're streamers. You know, like I'll if I'm taking a lottery picket at QB, I'll maybe leave with Kirk Cousins as my other QB in a draft. But other than that, I don't think I want to leave a draft with those players. You know,
in a one QB league,
Carr. Yeah, and especially in a one QB league, especially Derek Carr. Like, you're right, the variance is too much. And at the end of the day, I think I'd rather go somewhere else than have to deal with that variance and not get the reward back. But I do like Olave, so that's a plus. All right. Well, on my radar, I've got Jimmy G going to the Las Vegas Raiders for 3 years, $72 million, with $24 million guaranteed this year. This is a hard one for me to evaluate, as it seems like I'm not high on him, and it seems like that might be the case here, due to the classic argument of leaving a Shanahan offense and the effect that it brings. So I want to open this one up to more of a discussion, and I'm going to ask you guys a couple of questions here. Help me and everyone else make up their minds on Jimmy G. Is this an improvement over last year?
From the Raiders' perspective?
Mm-hmm. For fantasy.
I don't know how you can make that argument, but I'm going to try my best to do that. Okay.
Okay.
So you're right. So Jimmy G left the Kyle Shanahan offense, which is very powerful, but he does have experience in the Josh McDaniels offense in New England, right? So there is some familiarity there. Cam's talked about all these like mid receivers that they've picked up. So some of them are going to break out, right? And so he has a ton of weapons. He's got a great running back. He has all the pieces there. He's playing in a dome. He's playing in, and he's playing against like high octane offenses in the division. So you can imagine like there's going to be a lot of scoring opportunities with those game scripts against the Chiefs and the Chargers. Bro, I'm really scraping here because Jimmy Garoppolo just cannot throw the ball more than 20 yards down the field. And that's the challenge, right? And it's like, no matter how many receivers you have, even if you have the best receiver in the league, like Davante Adams, I mean, you got to get the ball to him somehow. And, it's not going to work like in San Francisco where you can just hand it off to Deebo Samuel, right? It's going to be more complicated than that. And I don't know. I'm trying to convince myself that it's not going to be as bad as I think it is, but I don't know. What do you think?
You're right. You're grasping at straws. I'm curious. Cam, what do you think?
Yeah, I definitely don't think it's an improvement. Jimmy G can't throw the ball downfield. He's going to manage the game okay, but I think they're going to rely heavily on Josh Jacobs. I'm definitely fully in on Josh Jacobs this year, but
Well then, real quick, let me jump in because that's my next question. Does his lack of air yards per throw limit the strength of the passing attack and lead to those increase of carries for Josh Jacobs? Because that's how I also see it as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's going to be a big workhorse year for Jacobs, and they have him on the tag, right? So they're okay. They're okay with running him into the ground, devalue.
Yep, they sure are.
Yeah.
It does feel that way.
There's one more piece we have to talk about with Jimmy G, and that's the injury concern. Mm-hmm. The dude's going to be injured at some point during the year, right? Because he just doesn't know how to stay healthy. The backup right now is Brian Hoyer.
Yeah.
And so assuming they don't draft a quarterback with their number 7 overall pick, they don't trade up, whatever. I feel like the value of Davante Adams and the Vegas Raiders, it's going to sound silly, increases once Jimmy G goes out, just like it did last year with Brock Purdy. Yeah. There's going to be somebody who's going to play and be able to throw the ball further than Jimmy G.
Yeah, I don't know. I wish they still had Stidham on their roster. That's no joke.
Me too.
He really is capable. Is Brian Hoyer at this point capable? How old is he? 35?
Probably older.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, honestly. I mean, football years, he's like
37.
But yeah.
37.
He's going to be a quarterback coach next year.
Mm-hmm. And that's the thing. Maybe that's what they brought him in for. Maybe they're going to draft a rookie and then they're going to have him be the quarterback coach next year and call it a day. Because if they do that, I feel like I can get behind their plan on offense. But from an outside perspective, I don't know what they're doing.
Is anybody interested in any rookie quarterback below Hendon Hooker, though?
It's all situational, I guess, right?
Even from a developmental standpoint, I don't think that there's any rookie beyond those top four that anybody. But like you said, Brock Purdy, nobody thought that he was going to have a chance to be anything either. But there's just not a lot of guys past that top four that I think really have much of a shot of having staying power in the league.
You never know. Maybe what's his name from Georgia? Like, why am I blanking on his name? Stetson Bennett. Maybe he has some sort of like winning moxie, a very Taylor Heineke like mindset. So who knows?
Yeah. Hey, I did see that Jarrett Deggy, who transferred out of West Virginia to Western Kentucky, competed in our pro day. So maybe Jarrett Deggy. He could at least be pretty good in the Japanese league.
Yeah, maybe JT Barrett.
Yeah.
Last question on this, and then we can pivot. What does this mean for Devontae Adams?
It's not good.
Like, it's
not good.
Yeah. Are we all worried about it? Like, are we not drafting him as like a top 5 guy anymore?
I'm going to keep him.
That's how I feel.
Yeah. So obviously I have him in our league and I'm going to keep him, and I would still draft him top 5 just because of, even though I'm so out on Jimmy G, like I said, I think he's just going to get injured and there's going to be some other like young stud who's just going to fling the ball. And the only guy he'll be able to trust is Devontae in that offense. And so I think because of that, I'm okay with it. Again, Devontae put up numbers with Jarrett Stidham last year. So we know that he is a bit QB agnostic in the way that Hopkins was during his Texans years.
It's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
So just from an ECR standpoint, they have Garoppolo at 23, which I think is a pretty good spot for him on there. They have Devontae. So you asked, is he still top 5? They have him right outside. They have him 6 behind Jefferson, Chase, Kupp, Hill, and Diggs. And
that's fair.
Yeah, that seems right. And that's why I guess, because you could see in a world where it wasn't Jimmy G that he's better than Diggs, that he comes home better than Diggs, but
I'm surprised
we'll see.
They have, so they have tiers on here too. And not to get too off topic, but I'm surprised they have Hill in the second tier, not the first, with what he did last year with Tua hurt a lot of the year.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like they're dinging the Dolphins for Tua in general. Yeah. I mean, his ADP was low too. So, like I said, that's hard because once ADP starts, you have to really draft against other people in your league more than against experts.
Yeah, and I'm sure some people do also worry about there being 2 great wide receivers in that same team. Waddle is superstar also.
Yeah.
I'm thinking we skip Aaron Rodgers talk for now. I think that can be a long talk because there's so much like TBD. Like, I think the biggest takeaway or biggest point I wanted to make with Aaron Rodgers before we move on from quarterbacks is we all assume that he's going to go to the Jets, right? I think the biggest thing is, when does this happen? We don't know. Like, it could happen tomorrow. It could happen before the draft, after the draft. It could happen OTAs. It could happen in preseason. I think the Jets' future depends heavily on when he signs, because he needs to get some sort of like chemistry going with Garrett Wilson and those guys. And if he doesn't, it's going to be a long year next year for the Jets.
They're really playing chicken with the clock for sure. Because it did seem like Green Bay could even wait till just August 1st and they'd be fine with it, and which would just kill the Jets as far as preparation goes. So it's like, you're right. It's very interesting to see which domino is the one that topples them first. Because it seems like Rodgers was a bit premature by going on McAfee and saying, I'm a Jet, because now he has no, they're talking about the Lamar lack of leverage here. A-Rod just torched his leverage, and I don't know why he would do that in an open conversation.
The biggest question from that interview, the biggest issue from that interview was Rodgers saying, "Oh, I was really contemplating retirement before my ayahuasca trip," and now, he doesn't seem fully bought into the Jets, and if that's the case, that's really scary for them, because they don't have a backup plan. Zach Wilson's not a backup plan.
No, and their owner seems to be acting because of that, and like if you're Aaron Rodgers and that's what you're thinking, all you've done was just hurt your chances doing anything that you want to do.
Yeah.
Just keep your mouth shut sometimes.
Get it figured out. Lots of weapons. I mean, one of us easily in that receiver part could have talked about Lazard, and they already have weapons there. Great running back too. I mean, he's definitely set up. when he does decide to sign, if it happens. But yeah, Garrett Wilson and Alan Lazard, it's a good 1-2 punch. And Brees Hall looked like a world beater before he got hurt. Is supposed to be a generational talent. Think he is.
Yep.
Well, on that note, why don't we end off the podcast, since we're talking about seasons and change and all this? Let's forecast what we're most enthusiastic about going into this season. And I can kick us off. I am most excited to watch Kellen Moore go to the Chargers as their offensive coordinator, and the inevitable bounce back for Justin Herbert that will ensue afterwards. I just seen what Kellen Moore did for the Dallas offense, and then just seeing the lack of chances and the lack of goal that offense for the Chargers had last year. It's disheartening, and at the same time exciting, because with Herbert being healthy, with Palmer looking like he's taking the next step, that offense has a bunch of weapons, and assuming Eckler comes back, Kellen Moore is just going to have a bunch of toys to play with, and I'm really excited from a fantasy perspective to see what that looks like.
Yeah, agree there. I'm really excited about. I'm talking about the Bears a bunch. I really am stoked for the Bears. Like I said, I think they're probably the best 3-win team ever. Like the fact that they got the number 1 pick, but I think 7 of their games ended up as a 1-score game, so they are prime to have that big turnaround in a league full of parity. So seeing how DJ Moore and a full offseason of Chase Claypool with Darnell Mooney at the receiving core, Cole Kmet, Robert Tonyan, Deontay Foreman, Khalil Herbert. Finally, Justin has pieces around him. They're going to address the offensive line more probably in the draft as well. They finally have pieces around him. I can't wait to see this dynamic quarterback who has this type of Lamar Jackson type speed with an arm kind of finally be able to unleash his full potential next year.
It's exciting to watch for sure.
Yeah.
What about you, Cam?
So I've gone back and forth on this, and I was going to say something about the Dolphins, but I changed my mind last second. So I'm going to say the progression of Kenny Pickett to George Pickens and the Steelers in general, what they're going to do this year. Offensive lines looked a little better last year than the year before. I think they'll look a little better again. They're still not going to be a great line, but just how they progress, how Pickens progresses, and I'm excited to see what they do at running back, whether they stay with Najee or they are one of I think they're second for most running backs talked to in the draft. So Houston, I think, was first with 14. I think the Steelers talked to 13 or 12 running backs. So a lot of people think that they are going to go for somebody new, that they're not very, fans have kind of been out on Najee. Fantasy players have kind of been out on him. A lot of people think the Steelers are out on him. I'm just excited to see what they do and excited to see Kenny Pickett just ascend way higher than ECR. He's 24 right now. In my heart, he's maybe where Kirk Cousins is, 11.
Well, that's big. You know what? I could see why you would say that, and I am looking forward to that connection because I just Pickett's fun too. I think honestly Pittsburgh in general is really the one to watch. You don't know what they're going to do in the draft because they could use so many different things, but Tomlin just pulling it out to last season, the last bit like that. I was rooting for them, dude. I'm not going to lie. I was those last 3 weeks of the season. I was like, yes, get to 9, get back.
Never a losing season. And it's just crazy. He's going to find a way. He's going to
and games. And how people don't talk about him as one of the best coaches, and you can't live above 500 in this league. You just don't. And just to do that consistently is interesting. And that's all we have for you today. Thanks for tuning in to GTI. If you enjoyed today's episode, hit that thumbs up button, share with your friends, and of course, subscribe to the channel for future content.